Hello, hello. Hello, you guys. Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Removing Barriers to Solar on Schools and Local Governments in Southwest Virginia. We will have the following presenters: Tish Tablan from Generation 180, Hannah Coman from Southern Environmental Law Center, Chelsea Barnes from Appalachian Voices, and my name is Aaron Such. I'm with Solar United Neighbors. The goal of this webinar is to help you understand the barriers to solar on schools and government buildings and how you can help to eliminate them. It's going to be divided into 4 parts. I'm going to cover solar basics and terminology. Tish will speak about the benefits of solar on schools, and Hannah will speak to the barriers to solar on schools in Appalachian territory, followed by Chelsea Barnes of Appalachian Voices on how you can take action. Just some real basic Zoom housekeeping tips. If you have a question, please enter it into either the chat or the question box into the Zoom meeting. This will be recorded, and we will have a copy of the webinar after to make available to you after the presentation. We'll aim for about 45 minutes to about an hour. And if there are questions or clarifications, again, we are happy to stop after each presenter and then take a variety of questions afterwards. So again, welcome to the webinar. Again, my name is Aaron Such. I'm with Solar United Neighbors. If you're not familiar with our work, we are a nonprofit organization that represents solar owners and prospective solar owners. We help people go solar, fight for energy rights, and join together. So I'm going to give an overview of some of the solar basics, the terminology that we'll be covering today. Starting off just really from the most basic level, many of us come from different levels of background or understanding of solar. So I'm going to just start with the basics. When you're thinking of solar energy, you're usually dividing it into 2 different types of ways to harness the sun's energy. There's solar thermal, which harnesses the sun's heat energy. You could think of it as heating water for bathing or heating space, but we're really going to focus on the second type of solar technology, and that is solar photovoltaic, or PV. Photovoltaic is actually a combination of 2 words, photo meaning light, and voltaic or voltage. So you're harnessing the sun's light to produce electricity. And the systems themselves are grouped into multiple panels called arrays that are measured in kilowatts or 1,000 watt increments. So if you had 4 250 watt panels, you would have a 1,000 watt system or a 1 kilowatt system. So the capacity and size of a system is measured in kilowatts. Most of the system, in fact, more than 99% of the systems out there on homes, schools, businesses, are what are called grid tied. They tie into the electric grid. Most of them at this point do not use batteries for storage. But the way that that works is that the energy that is produced by the panels is consumed instantaneously by the site's loads, anything that consumes electricity. So if you have solar panels on a school, that electricity might be consumed by lighting, air conditioning, computers. And then you have a system that is used to account for that. And that's the second kind of major word that we'll be speaking of today. It's net metering. So it's a billing system that gives full credit for the energy that's produced, but not used at the time. So the energy that is instantaneously consumed is obviously used at the site. But in many cases, solar systems might produce surpluses. So if you have a grid-tied system, and say the school is out for the summer and there's a nice sunny day like there is today, you're producing an excess of energy that the site is not going to be using. And that essentially spins the meter backwards and produces a surplus. Kind of works like rollover minutes did when cell phones used to do that. So any surpluses are applied to times of limited production or seasonal or times of the season when usage exceeds what's being produced by the solar system. So what that equates to that solar systems on schools or government buildings can produce a percentage of annual energy production, all the way from 5, 10%, all the way up to 100%. And the fact that it's grid tied allows them to do that. In fact, 99% of solar systems across the country and in Virginia use this grid tied net metering system. It's also responsible for a majority of Virginia's solar jobs, about 80% according to the Solar Foundation. So with the basics, you have net metering. It's clear that net metering is responsible for a majority of these distributed solar systems. That's solar systems on homes, businesses, schools, government buildings. And it's a key enabler of clean energy for local community and for jobs. Again, about 80% of Virginia's solar jobs depend on distributed net metered solar system. And just to give you some perspective, that's about 3,000 or about 3,500 distributed solar jobs in Virginia compared to the 1,502 employees of Appalachian Power. So again, solar distributed on roofs is a big job creator. Moving on to another key term would be power purchase agreements, which we'll be talking about a lot today in the presentation. It's a finance structure that makes solar more accessible to nonprofits. And there's a lot of different ways that the PPA works, but typically a tax-paying third-party developer finances, installs, owns, operates, and maintains a system on the host's property. The host, whether it's a school or government facility, will then purchase the system or purchase the energy at a flat, variable, or predetermined rate based on the terms of the power purchase agreement. Power purchase agreements typically are about 20 years, but can be anywhere between about 10 to 25 years. And the reason why they're so key for nonprofits and school is that third party monetizes the tax credits and incentives. Schools and government buildings are non-tax paying entities, so they're not able to benefit from incentives like the 26% federal tax credit and MACRS, Modified Accelerated Cost Recovery System, or accelerated depreciation. So that third party is able to monetize those tax credits and incentives and really make the system pencil it out. It addresses the principal barriers to solar, which are typically high upfront costs, and it enables the host to go solar and see bill savings and cost savings from day one. So Tish is really going to get into the weeds about that. But those are the two main items. What I would say is that net metered solar and PPAs are responsible for a vast majority of solar jobs in Virginia. And taking a look at the slide, you see that there are a lot in Northern Virginia and not as much in Southwest Virginia. So hopefully we are able to address those barriers, start to create jobs, and enable local municipalities to build clean local energy into their systems. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Tish Tablan of Generation 180. Thank you, Tish.
Thanks, Aaron. Give me a minute to get my presentation up.
Sure. Happy to take any questions in the meantime if there are any.
None yet. You're just doing such a great job, Aaron.
Thanks.
Okay, can you see my screen now? Okay, everyone else is muted, so I think you can see my screen.
Yep,
Thank you.
good
so
to
much.
go.
Thank you. My name is Tish Tablan. I'm the program Generation 180. We are a national nonprofit organization based in Charlottesville, Virginia, and we are focused on inspiring and equipping people to take action on clean energy in their own communities. So I lead our National Solar for All Schools campaign, which provides resources and support for K-12 schools to access the benefits of solar energy. So while I'll be sharing many examples specifically about school districts and opportunities to go solar apply equally to both school districts and local governments. And solar does provide a wide array of positive benefits for the localities and the communities, from local job creation to obviously a healthy community, healthy people with less air pollution, helping localities meet their climate commitments, and it creates educational, normalizes clean energy for your community, provides opportunities to teach your students or citizens about energy. But overwhelmingly, I've found from talking to many local leaders that the opportunity for immediate energy savings is by far the most compelling reason that localities and school districts are going solar. So particularly in light of the new budget constraints that local governments and school districts are experiencing due to the pandemic, I'll be focusing on this opportunity to save taxpayer dollars by to make tough decisions right now on how to trim expenses, what programs to freeze, or staff to furlough. My children attend Charlottesville City Schools, and due to recent budget constraints, they made the decision to cut the elementary school Spanish program and reassign their teachers. Going solar can allow localities to be more financially resilient, especially during this time of economic uncertainty. And they can, instead of cutting programs or cutting staff, they can focus on cutting their electric bills as a way to limit expenditures. And we know from looking at this slide that energy is a big part of their budgets. The local governments spend 40% of their expenditures on secondary and elementary education. And when that money goes to schools, the second highest bill is for energy after staff. So Aaron touched on power purchase agreements. And so he talked about this as a financing vehicle where a third party is paying for and maintaining your solar energy system. So for local governments, this has such a win-win-win because you have zero upfront costs. You have zero maintenance costs. The developer is the one that's going to maintain your energy system for the life of the contract, often up to 25 years is what we're seeing in Virginia. And of course, you'll see immediate savings from a lower electricity rate. So you will pay the solar developer a lower rate than what you'd be paying your utility. And in 2014, the General Assembly passed a law that created a pilot program the kind of energy savings that these localities and school districts are seeing. So just recently, in last December, Fairfax County announced a huge project. So they're over 100 municipal buildings, including schools and park buildings. So once that is completed, which will take a few years to complete, they estimate they will produce enough energy to power 214,000 homes per year. That's on par with a municipal utility scale. And the projected savings are fair 5 years without cutting programs.
Hey, Tish, this is Aaron. You were, sorry, Tish, you were breaking up a little bit. Maybe if you could cover that last point for us again.
Sure. Okay, so I'll can you hear me now, Aaron?
It's a little bit better, but still not
so
good.
Okay, I'll try to slow down then. million over the 25-year life of the contract. And I can think of few other ways that a locality or school district can see that kind of savings without cutting. And it's not.
Hey, folks, I think we lost Tish there. Hopefully she can join back in a minute. Erin, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can try to download her slides, and maybe you can share the slides while Tisha's speaking, and maybe that'll help with, because it seems like it must be her internet connectivity.
Yeah, it looks like she's back.
I'm back. Okay. Sorry about that. I hope I fixed the internet here. So let me try to share screen once more. And thank you for your patience, everyone. Okay. Okay, so hopefully everyone can hear me again. I apologize. So again, power purchase agreements are being used across the Commonwealth. It's benefiting small rural communities like Middlesex County Public Schools. And this community, which is in the northern neck or eastern region of the state, is now the first school district in the state to power all of its school buildings with 100% solar. So imagine having zero electric bill to operate your school buildings. So they will see $4.74 million in cost savings over the 25-year contract. And most of that savings is end weighted, which means they will pay a relatively stable price for electricity as the Dominion's electricity prices continue to rise. So in this first year, they saw an estimated savings of over $50,000. And each year they'll see those savings rise. But that $50,000 is enough to pay for another staff person or to keep some of your programs when you're in a budget crunch. So this is something that schools should really be looking into, and local governments, as a way to improve your cost savings. Because of this win-win-win, we've seen exponential growth in solar on schools in Virginia. So this past fall, Generation 180 released a report on solar schools in Virginia, and these are some of the numbers that we shared from the report. So you can see we started in 2014 when the pilot program for power purchase agreements was started in Dominion territory. It took a few years to get started. Albemarle County Public Schools was the first to use it in 2016, and then it's just taken off since then. So just in that 2-year period between 2017 and 2019, we saw 3 times the number of schools going solar and a 10-fold increase in the amount of solar installed on schools. However, almost all of that growth is happening in Dominion Energy's territory on schools, and it's because of the option to use power purchase agreements. Right now, school districts and local governments in Appalachian Power Territory cannot use a power purchase agreement. And then you can see what the results are. 99.9% of solar capacity installed on Virginia schools is outside of Appalachian Power Territory. Under the newly passed Solar Freedom Bill, a homeowner is allowed to put up to 25 kilowatts of solar on his or her property. Therefore, there's less solar installed on schools in the entire Appalachian Power Territory than I could install on my own home this year. So that kind of disparity is what we're here to talk about. And I'm going to hand it over to Hannah Coman with Southern Environmental Law Center to explain some of that legal context of what's happening in Southwest Virginia.
Tish, thank you so much. I did want to say we do have a few comments and questions in the chat function. I'll let us address some of those when we have our Q&A at the end of the session. Hi, my name is Hannah Coman, and I'm a staff attorney at the Charlottesville office of the Southern Environmental Law Center, known as SELC. SELC is a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting the natural environments and health of the Southeast. For over 30 years, our attorneys have encouraged the expansion of cleaner, renewable energy sources, including solar energy. Currently, our regional solar initiative seeks to reduce the impediments to solar, expedite solar development in our region, make solar accessible to all Southerners, and help the Southeast reap the many benefits of solar power, including the economic and environmental benefits. Slide, please. So first, I'd like to provide a little background on electric utilities in Virginia. This is a map of the electric service territories across Virginia. In Virginia, we have 3 investor-owned utilities: Dominion, Appalachian Power Company, Kentucky Utilities, which does business as Old Dominion Power or Power Company, or ODP, and that's in the far southwest tip of Virginia. In addition, we have 13 electric cooperatives and quite a few municipalities. So solar policy and energy regulation can be different in the different electric utility territories. Therefore, we don't have uniform policies across the state. Depending on where you live in the state, different opportunities to go solar may be available to you. So when we're talking about the customers in APCO's territory, we are referring to customers who live and do business in that red portion of the state that you can see on your map. In recent years, there's been growing interest in APCO's territory to go solar. For example, last year, 8 communities in Southwest Virginia obtained a Soul Smart designation, which means that these local governments have streamlined regulations and are implementing solar initiatives. The Solar Work Group of Southwest Virginia is also currently working to build the projects included in their second commercial scale solar RFP and have recently issued an RFI for a commercial scale solar development partner. So there's been a lot of growing interest in the APCO territory surrounding solar, but there have been some legislative and contractual limits that have prevented customers in APCO's territory from actually going solar. Slide, please. So this was a big year in the Virginia General Assembly for energy policy, and a lot's changed and lots been done. Some of this legislation address solar. Here's just a small sampling of the many bills that passed this year related to renewable energy policy in Virginia. And today I'm going to focus on the Virginia Clean Economy Act and the Solar Freedom Act. Slide, please. The Virginia Clean Economy Act, or the VCEA, is a monumental piece of legislation. Today, I'm just going to discuss, though, what it changed in terms of net metering and power purchase agreements, those 2 terms that Aaron discussed earlier. These changes are roughly the same in the VCEA as in the Solar Freedom Act. The legislation increases the net metering cap in all investor-owned utility, thank you. The legislation increases access to power purchase agreements in all investor-owned utility territories. Although some restrictions remain, the PPA cap in APCO's territory is now 40 megawatts, up from 7 megawatts previously. In addition, it increases the net metering cap in all investor-owned utilities from 1% to 6% of the utility's adjusted peak load forecast for the previous year. For APCO, that means that the net metering cap has been increased from 40 megawatts to approximately 240 megawatts. So the big takeaway is that these 2 policies, net metering and power purchase agreements, are really what enables a customer to go solar. And they were both expanded legislatively in all investor-owned utility territories. The expansion of net metering and availability of power purchase agreements is a trend we're also seeing across Virginia. For example, last year in 2019, the General Assembly passed legislation expanding net metering and power purchase agreements in the electric cooperative territory as well. However, this legislation only applies to jurisdictional customers, and it does not necessarily apply to non-jurisdictional customers, which are also known as public authorities. Next slide, please. So, what are public authorities? In this context, public authorities are government-owned buildings such as schools, city halls, and wastewater treatment facilities. Again, they're also referred to as non-jurisdictional customers. Public authorities are usually big energy users and have different needs from a typical utility customer like you or me. In terms of megawatts sold, a rough estimate is that the public authorities in APCO's territory make up about 13.6% of APCO's customers on a per customer basis. The Virginia State Corporation Commission is the public utility commission in Virginia, and it regulates the rates and services of the electric utility monopolies. But the State Corporation Commission only has authority to regulate the rates of the jurisdictional customers. Since the State Corporation Commission does not regulate the rates of the public authorities or the non-jurisdictional customers, the government-owned buildings and schools must negotiate their rates with the utility directly. And this is done in different ways by the different utilities. In Dominion's territory, the Virginia Energy Purchasing Governmental Association, VEPGA, V-E-P-G-A, represents all of the public authorities in Dominion's territory and negotiates a contract with Dominion. This contract is publicly available on the VEPGA website, vepga.org. With a few exceptions, the VEPGA contract explicitly applies the net metering regulations and the Power Purchase Agreement pilot program in the Virginia Code and the Virginia Acts of Assembly that apply to jurisdictional customers in Dominion's territory to the non-jurisdictional customers. So that means that if you're a school in Dominion's territory and you have the recent changes in legislation that increased net metering and PPA availability, you can take advantage of those changes. It'll also apply to you because the contract just links directly to the legislation. And this is different in APCO's territory. In APCO's territory, a steering committee called the Virginia Municipal League, Virginia Association of Counties, APCO Steering Committee, referred to as the VML-VACO APCO Steering Committee, represents all of the public authorities in APCO's territory and negotiates a contract with APCO. To my knowledge, this contract is not publicly available. However, in order to explain the hurdles schools are facing in APCO territory to go solar, a few entities have shared the specific provisions relating to net metering with us. Slide, please. So the current contract that is in place between APCO and the public authorities is from 2016. And it's currently, a new contract is currently under negotiation with APCO. The current contract expressly limits the amount of net metered solar projects owned by public authorities to 3 megawatts for the entire APCO territory. To put this in perspective, as Tish stated earlier, Arlington Public Schools has a PPA for 2.5 megawatts, which covers only 5 schools. Additionally, Fairfax County recently awarded a solar power purchase agreement contract for the installation of more than 40 megawatts of solar arrays at Fairfax County government school and park sites. The current contract also arguably limits power purchase agreements. The first sentence of the net metering provision in the contract states that net metering is only available to customers who own and operate an eligible renewable fuel generator. This means that a customer could not qualify to net meter if the customer leases the solar facility or is financing the solar facility through a power purchase agreement. I should point out that the contract also has a definition for a net metering customer, and there the term is defined as a customer who owns and operates or contracts with other persons to own or operate or both a renewable fuel generator. This language would allow a customer to lease a solar facility or finance a solar facility through a power purchase agreement. However, that language is in direct conflict with the other language in the contract, and we've also heard from solar developers and schools trying to go solar that APCO has refused to allow them to use power purchase agreements. So a lot has changed in Virginia since 2016. Solar is much more accessible and there's much more interest in solar. It's clear that this current contract is preventing communities in APCO's territory from going solar. To speak more about this, Chelsea Barnes from Appalachian Voices is next.
Thanks so much, Hannah. I'm Chelsea Barnes. I'm the New Economy Program Manager for Appalachian Voices down in Norton, Virginia, and Wise County down in the Coalfield region. We help to co-convene the Solar Work Group of Southwest Virginia, which is a group of economic development professionals, nonprofits, schools, etc., that are all working to advance solar energy in the Coalfield region as a way of diversifying and growing the economy in this former coal-dependent region. So much of the territory is covered, that we work in is covered by Appalachian Power, but also we work with other utilities as well. So, right, as Hannah has explained, all of the barriers that the schools are facing right now due to the contracts that are currently in place and being renegotiated right now. The timeline for these renegotiations is over the next 9 months or so, maybe up to 12 months, just kind of depending on how the negotiations go and depending on how different factors related to the coronavirus and Appalachian Power's rate case. Representatives from the local governments are currently participating in those negotiations, but all local government officials are able to participate in the steering committee that Hannah described if they want to. The important thing to note here is that those limitations on PPAs and net metering is something that Appalachian Power could lift immediately. There's no reason why they need to keep those limitations in place. The contract technically expires at the end of June, just in the next few days. So during this time when schools and local governments are struggling financially, it would be a really good gesture for Appalachian Power to go ahead and expand the net metering cap and lift the restrictions on PPAs consistent with the laws that have been passed in order to give schools the flexibility to install solar projects that have been installed for months and even years. As the negotiations have been ongoing, renegotiating the contracts that limit net metering and power purchase agreements, we've heard some claims from Appalachian Power representatives about these negotiations and the impact that net metering has on electricity rates for local government for local government buildings and schools. Appalachian Power has stated that if they increase the net metering cap above that very small 3 megawatt limitation, that they'll have to increase rates for all of the other customers. The reason that they're saying that is they're claiming that net metering shifts costs onto other customers that don't have solar installed. This is a very common thing that utilities say, but it is not true. There have been many studies across the entire country that have examined the costs and benefits of solar energy and distributed solar energy in particular, that have shown that net metered systems actually add value to the communities that they're in and to the electricity grid. As you can imagine, when you install solar energy, you're avoiding transmission costs, distribution costs for transmitting power from a large out-of-state power plant to your home or your school. When you install your energy system right on site, you avoid all of those costs. So what APPA is really talking about is that they are losing profits because they're not able to build as much infrastructure, build as much generation capacity, and then bill that to you. But overall, when we look at the impact that solar energy has on the grid and it has in local communities where solar is installed, we really see that these systems have more benefits than they do costs. As Aaron noted early on in this presentation, local installed solar energy projects bring in lots of jobs and economic development activity. The distributed solar industry provides many more jobs in Virginia compared to what Appalachian Power provides. So we need to look at the full picture when we talk about the costs and benefits of solar versus not allowing these net metered systems. Another thing that Appalachian Power has said is that schools and local governments might be able to use what APCO calls a green tariff. This is a program that Appalachian Power provides currently to its business customers that allows a business to pay a little bit more on their electricity bill to say that their power is coming from a clean energy resource. This is not a cost-effective solution for businesses or for government entities. Basically, what this program does is provide incentives for Appalachian Power to buy solar energy or wind energy from out-of-state large energy systems. What we want to do with expanding the net metering cap and power purchase and removing limitations on power purchase agreements is to make sure that when a business or a government wants to go solar, that those projects can be built in our communities and benefit the tax base and benefit the local workforce. So if you're fired up about this, as I am, as most of our panelists are, I think, there's several things that you can do. If you're on this call and you're a local government official or a school board member, find out if you have a representative on that steering committee. I have a slide at the end that shows who's on the steering committee, and I'll show that at the end so that you can look to see who's on that committee and whether you know anyone or whether anyone from your government is on that committee. You can coordinate with other members of your local government to talk to these steering committee members and let them know why you're interested in solar, why you want to expand the net metering cap, and why power purchase agreements are important. So you can also look into joining that steering committee. That's something to discuss with your other local government officials and with the steering committee itself to see if that's something that's appropriate for you. What we really need out of these contracts, as Hannah mentioned, in order to allow solar projects to move forward, is to clarify the language in the contract to make sure that PPAs are allowed, and then expand that 3 megawatt net metering cap that is currently stalling all projects in Appalachian Power territory. We think a 6-fold increase is appropriate, given that the current law that was enacted this year expands the cap statewide by 6-fold. But that, that specific number should be considered by the steering committee based on the current interest in solar energy in the region and the long-term interest over the next few years, given that the contract will last for a few years. The link at the bottom will take you to a list of the steering committee members as well, but again, I'll show that slide at the end. And you can also just contact me directly at chelsea@appvoices.org if you want to chat more about what you can do as a local government official. So if you're on this call and you're not a local government official, you can call and write to your school board members, your county boards, city council members, town managers, and mayors, and just talk to them about why you think this is important and why you think that your schools and local government buildings should be able to go solar, and help them understand what the barriers are. Because this is a really complicated and nuanced issue, and not everybody understands all these intricacies of the policies and the contract. So just even having a conversation to help them understand what the current barriers are goes a long way to helping us to break down these barriers. And again, what you're talking to them about is getting rid of the language around PPAs that is prohibiting PPAs from moving forward, clarifying that that PPAs are allowed, and expanding the 3 megawatt cap. We've also got a petition up on Solar United Neighbors website. If you just go to their Virginia Take Action page there at the bottom, you'll see the Don't Let Appalachian Power Block Solar on Schools and Local Government Buildings petition. That petition will send an email to your local government officials for you. But those conversations can also go a long way beyond just signing the petition. If you have a conversation with your town manager, your school board member, that helps a lot too. You can also just sign up with our with the groups that are giving the presentation today to just stay up to date on what's happening with solar, especially for solar for schools and local governments. Each of our organizations has newsletters and updates and Facebook pages, so connect with us to stay in the loop about what's happening with solar in Virginia and in Southwest Virginia. So I'm going to stop there, and we'll go ahead and take questions. Just real quick, I'm going to leave this here for a minute so you can see the link again to the petition. And then next I'm going to go to the slide with the steering committee members, just so folks can take a look at that for a few minutes. So one of the questions that came up, I think would be good for Erin to take. Erin, if you're ready. This question comes from Skip Skinner, who says that, are all the terms of PPAs confidential, or does anyone have a database of contract terms for PPAs in Virginia?
Yeah, thanks. It's a good question, and it's you know, I don't have a clear answer to it. My understanding is that most of them are somewhat, you know, the specific terms of each PPA is probably negotiated between those two parties. On my list, or on my slide, there was a link to Solar Energy Industry Association link about PPAs. I'm happy to, I can try to find it and share it again. And I think you could see some general stipulations of those contracts, some things to, you know, that are pretty commonly found. I don't know, Tish, you might also have additional input on that as well.
Yeah, Tish just shared a link in the chat, so everyone should be able to see that. It's a link to NREL standard contracts.
Awesome.
So that is, thank you for that question about sharing PPA contracts. My understanding would be that you could potentially FOIA a contract like that. I don't know of anyone in Virginia who has shared all those contracts. However, one thing you can do is on Generation 180's site, we have our Virginia Schools report. And in that, we list every single school, and they're mostly public schools in the state of Virginia who have gone solar. And again, most of the larger size installations you see are power purchase agreements. And I would reach out to any of those school districts or localities that you know that have used one. You can also find a list through Dominion's website. They have a list of all of the localities or school districts that have used it. And you can just reach out to them and see if they will share directly. And they might also be able to share any lessons learned or tips on their contracts. Additionally, the way procurement works for local governments is those contracts can be writable. So for instance, I don't think the Arlington contract was written in a way that other localities can use it, but I believe Richmond Public Schools is, Albemarle County's was for a certain amount of time. So that's another thing you can look into, is see which contracts are able to be shared. So for instance, if you look at the rate that Richmond Public Schools got, you can basically sign on to that contract or use that as a template, and you can basically bypass the RFP process that way. So there's some advantages to exploring what other localities have done that, and potentially some are able to be written as a way to see up the RFPs.
Thanks so much, Tish. And there's a couple resources in the chat box for all the attendees. And Tish, the next question I have, I think is for you, maybe, if you know this. What % of Middlesex Electric's bill does that $50,000 represent? So I think, you know, it's a question about how much they're saving.
Right, so that's a great question. So my understanding is that Middlesex County, Middlesex County Public Schools is a small school district. They have 3 school buildings. So that picture I showed was the solar facility that produces energy for all 3 school buildings. So I think starting from day 1, it's 100% solar. The reason it's $50,000 at year 1 is because, you know, starting in year 1, the rate they are paying to SunTribe Solar is, you know, according to their press release, 6.84 cents per kilowatt hour. So that 50,000 comes from the delta between the 6.84 cents per kilowatt hour rate they're paying to SunTribe Solar versus whatever rate they were previously paying Dominion. Maybe that's in the 9 to 10 cent range. How they get their estimates for the big numbers for up to $4 million of solar is they're going to pay, you know, I haven't seen the terms of their contract, but let's say if it's fairly steady at 6.84, maybe there's a slight escalator and it goes up over time. We know that utility rates tend to go up over time. On average, 2 to 3% is a good rule of thumb. So as Dominion's rates goes up and their rate stays steady, their savings will continue to rise. But they are getting 100% of those buildings' needs, energy needs from solar.
Yeah, we actually have the solar installer on from
Thanks, Rob.
yeah. um Rob, do you want to add anything? I can unmute you, or did Tish cover it? All right, I'm gonna unmute Rob real quick.
Hey y'all.
Go ahead.
Hey everyone. Great presentation. Just to add on to what Tish said, the how we determine overall savings rates for a school district like Middlesex is exactly as you said. We examine what the historic rate of rise is in that particular utility, and we look at historic billing for each of those school districts, and then we, essentially measure the delta between those two things. I'd point out that Middlesex in particular is kind of a unique school district in that all of their solar arrays are able to be ground mounted versus a lot of the roof mounted systems you see on other school systems. So you want to think about things like rates in a fairly dynamic way when you're thinking about what kind of rates are available for PPAs and that sort of thing. But overall, yes, it's 100% of their needs, and that $50,000 in year one is a correct number. So awesome job on that, guys.
And Rob, before you jump off, can you share quickly, are any of, or which of your contracts you have can be used by other schools or localities?
Sure. There are a couple of them. We have an agreement with Henrico that's rideable. There's an agreement with Westmoreland County Public Schools that's rideable. For anyone who is on the call, if you're a local government or you're a school system, we're always happy to share what the details of those contracts look like with potential partners. And the folks here have my information. Feel free to reach out. We're happy to be sort of good stewards of best practices here for Virginia PPAs, because every school system's different, every government's different, and everybody wants slightly different things. But there are some sort of good standards and best practices to follow for sure. Appreciate it, guys. Great webinar.
Thanks so much, Rob. The next question that I have, I'm gonna pivot to Hannah. I'm gonna try to take a quick stab at it and then let Hannah explain any more details. So the question asker says that APCO will not be receptive to net metering because it will cost them profit. Can legislation intervene into the negotiations to require more net metering? So that's something that we've been talking with some of the legislators who serve constituencies in Southwest Virginia. We have at least two, probably I'll say three legislators up by now who have expressed interest in running legislation next session to try to resolve this issue if it is not resolved by the negotiations. Hannah, do you want to add anything to what the opportunity or challenges might be there?
Yeah, sure. So what's tricky about this is that, as I said in my presentation, we kind of have two separate buckets. We have jurisdictional customers and we have non-jurisdictional customers. And the State Corporation Commission regulates the rates for the jurisdictional customers. But for all of the non-jurisdictional customers, which are the government-owned buildings and schools, they have to negotiate their contract with their utility directly. That contract is kind of a secondary layer on top of the legislation. And it's hard to have legislation that, I guess it's conceivable you could have legislation that limits the contracting powers of parties, but it would definitely be an uphill battle. And so right now, how it exists is the non-jurisdictional customers are able to have contracts, and for example, in Dominion's territory, it references the legislation. So it's pretty clear that that legislation applies to those non-jurisdictional customers. But depending on how the contract's written, it can kind of create additional barriers. And at this point, we don't have any legislation that would address that. And it's kind of, it would be a real uphill battle to get some kind of crystal clear legislation that would do that.
Yes, I'm putting my advocate hat on. We're going to try everything we can to make sure that there's fair access to solar in Southwest Virginia. So, just that's kind of a stay tuned for folks, who are interested in talking to your legislators. The legislators that we've talked to that serve these areas are, very concerned about the utilities blocking solar when they clearly intended for, to expand solar access across the state with legislation that they passed this year. So, we'll try everything we can. And, if you want to contact your legislator, it's not premature to do so. And we can help with any sort of outreach that you need. If you have any questions about how to contact your legislator, please feel free to email me and I'll help you out. Next question is, what would be most helpful for us to provide to our steering committee members to enable them to feel comfortable pushing for these language changes in the contracts? So we have already developed 2 fact sheets that kind of hit on different parts of this issue that really provide the factual background about why this is important and what the issues are. We can send those now. And then we're also working on some information that would help kind of refute some of those claims that I went through on one of my slides, that really, to give the steering committee members the tools that they need to negotiate that contract most effectively. So to those of you who have registered for the webinar, we will be sending those resources out after the webinar. If you're watching this live on Facebook and you didn't register, we can just send me an email and I can get those to you. And, we'll be happy to also provide any other information. If you're talking to your steering committee members and they have questions that you can't answer, we're happy to provide support on that as well.
Chelsea, I'd like to just add one point. We've had some contact with the steering committee members, and I just want to say that I think they've been very responsive to these issues, and they're really trying to address these concerns as well as they can. So I think they're doing a great job, and I think the last contract was in 2016. It's a new world now. So I think definitely reaching out and expressing your views is great, but I just kind of want to put in a plug that the steering committee is doing a great job, and kind of the more support we can give them and the more information and the better.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Hannah, for bringing that up. We definitely, we're providing this information because we feel that everyone, all local government officials and all people in these communities need this information to understand, what their tax money is going to and why their schools or local governments can't go solar. But these, the people on this committee are working really hard to get the best deal possible and make sure that they're able to provide electricity service to all the buildings in their area at the lowest cost possible, and with the best services possible. So these are not your adversaries; they are your colleagues and your advocates. So keep that in mind when you're reaching out. Next question is, what is the feasibility of negotiating one of the sample PPA contracts successfully in APCO territory? So, right now, it's kind of a big open question. Appalachian Power has said that they are willing to negotiate with schools or local government buildings one-on-one if they want to go outside of what the current contract allows. So if your school or your local government is like, we're going to make this happen no matter what, you can get in touch with APCO and try to negotiate outside of the contract. Basically, you'd be pulling yourself out of the contract that's negotiated by the steering committee. We have also heard from some solar developers that for the schools or for the projects that have reserved capacity and the 3 megawatt net metering capacity, but are stalled because of the limitations on PPAs. Appalachian Power has said that those folks can go ahead and move forward with registering a PPA. So we're not really sure what that means, and whether that's limited time exception that APCO is considering, or whether they're changing their tone on PPAs given the legislative changes. This is all happening at the commission, the State Corporation Commission, over the next couple months. And we'll kind of see what happens, how the commission rules on some of these negotiations, and what APCO's position is on PPAs going forward based on what happens in the next couple months. So it's something to keep an eye on. And just we'll keep you all updated and see what happens. Anyone want to add to that?
No, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think the progress moving forward is showing that the public outreach, and that just by shining light on this, is having a little bit of effect. And that from an industry perspective, yes, having some language that some PPAs are moving forward doesn't really provide the certainty that solar developers need. And, we have essentially projects that are being stopped in their tracks right now. And so that's why this work is so important. And I also just saw the comment from Laura, City of Roanoke. The biggest thing that would help is to get localities and schools on their list to be active and participating members on the steering committee. Absolutely. And also to echo the thoughts, the steering committee is a great ally, but we as an organization have helped a lot of people go solar in APCO territory, and those same people want to see solar on their schools and government facilities. And so, these are the steering committee's answers to the constituency, to folks that are demanding it. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. And yeah, from a current member of the steering committee says that, if your city's or your town or your county's not on that list, get involved. It's definitely a place where more local government official voices are welcome, I think. The only other question I've seen so far is whether or not the recording of this webinar will be available. And Erin answered yes, absolutely. We will be sending it out to the people who registered, and then we'll also post that on our the solar work group of Southwest Virginia. It'll be posted on our website. I'm not sure, Tish or Erin, if you all can post webinars links on your websites.
Yeah, we can share it as well.
Great.
And Chelsea, yes, I just want to respond to the very first question in the chat from David Jenkins, just to clarify. His question was, does schools include universities? So just in case, what he means is, in my presentation, when I say schools, I mean K through 12 public and private schools. So any of the numbers I shared in that bar chart just refers to K-12 schools. So universities were not included in my numbers, but they are eligible for PPAs.
And just to clarify too, sometimes schools, like for example, the University of Virginia, they actually negotiate their energy procurement with Dominion directly through their own contract. So there are some schools that kind of go outside of this two bucket landscape that I've talked about.
Great. Well, I see no more questions, and we're about at the hour. So I think we'll wrap up from there, and we'll be following up with more information. And again, just please feel free to reach out, and if you have any questions or need any support going forward. Thanks to all our panelists, and thanks for everyone for joining. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.